I grabbed the last box from the truck bed and hefted it against my hip. The cardboard had gone soft from 3 days of loading and unloading, and I could feel the books shifting inside as I walked up the gravel path to my new front door. The white clapboard house sat quiet in the late afternoon sun. 2 stories, green shutters, a wraparound porch that needed some work on the railings, 3 acres of mostly woods stretching back behind it. Not bad for what I could afford after the divorce settlement. I pushed through the front door and set the box down in the living room with the others. My back ached from all the lifting, but this was it. Everything I owned now fit in one pickup truck load. Funny how a 15-year marriage could get whittled down to so little. The house felt bigger now that my stuff was inside. Christine Burke had left most of the furniture when she moved to the nursing home. A brown couch that had seen better days, a coffee table with water rings, a kitchen table with 4 mismatched chairs. She'd even left dishes and pots and pans. Her family probably didn't want to deal with moving at all. I walked through the rooms, getting a feel for the place. The floors creaked under my feet, especially near the stairs. Tall windows let in good light, though some of the panes rattled when the wind picked up. The kitchen was small but functional. Upstairs had 2 bedrooms and a bathroom with an old clawfoot tub. This would work fine. Remote enough that I wouldn't have neighbors dropping by, but close enough to town for supplies. Perfect for getting my freelance writing business off the ground without Ellie's voice in my head telling me I was wasting my time. I spent the rest of the day unpacking. Clothes went in the bedroom dresser and closet. Books filled the built-in shelves in the living room. My laptop and printer found a spot on the kitchen table where I could work with a view of the backyard woods. The sun was setting by the time I got to the kitchen boxes. I'd grabbed whatever dishes and utensils I could fit, but Christine had left plenty to work with. Her plates were chipped but clean. The silverware was old but solid. I opened the drawer next to the sink to put away the forks and knives I'd brought. The drawer stuck a little, like it hadn't been opened in a while. When I finally got it pulled out, I found it mostly empty except for some old rubber bands and a few loose screws. That's when I saw the paper tucked way back in the corner. I reached in and pulled it out. Folded twice, white paper that felt thick between my fingers. The creases were sharp, like someone had pressed them down hard. I unfolded it and smoothed it out on the counter. House Rules was written at the top in careful cursive script, the kind of handwriting they used to teach in school, all loops and slants. Below that, 5 numbered items in the same neat writing. 1. Keep the porch light on from sunset to sunrise. 2. Do not open windows after midnight. 3. If the phone rings between 2 and 3 a.m., let it ring. Do not answer. 4. If you hear voices calling your name from outside after dark, do not go outside. Do not look out the windows. 5. If you hear crying from the basement, leave the house immediately. Do not return until morning. I read through the list twice, then let out a laugh. What the hell was this? Christine Burke must have been further gone than I'd thought. Her family mentioned she'd been having some memory issues before they moved her to the nursing home, but this was something else entirely. Voices calling from outside, crying from the basement. I looked around the kitchen. Everything seemed normal enough. Old, but clean. The basement door was right there by the back entrance, painted white like the rest of the trim. Nothing spooky about it. Poor woman probably watched too many horror movies in her old age. Or maybe she'd started mixing up reality with whatever book she was reading. I'd seen it happen with my own grandmother toward the end. She'd get confused about whether something had really happened or if she'd seen it on TV. The porch light thing made some sense, I guess. Good for security. And not answering the phone in the middle of the night wasn't crazy advice. But the rest of it? Pure nonsense. I folded the paper back up along the same creases. For a second I thought about throwing it away, but something made me hesitate. Not because I believed any of it. Just felt weird tossing out something the old woman had taken the time to write down so carefully. I opened the junk drawer next to the stove and dropped the paper inside with the takeout menus and random batteries Christine had left behind. Out of sight, out of mind. The whole thing was ridiculous anyway. I had real problems to worry about, like getting my business up and running and making enough money to keep this place. The last thing I needed was to start jumping at shadows because some confused old woman had left me a list of ghost stories. I fell asleep without any trouble that first night. The bed was comfortable enough, and I was tired from 3 days of moving and unpacking. The house settled around me with the usual creaks and groans of old wood, but nothing that kept me awake. I'd always been a decent sleeper anyway. The banging started around 3 in the morning. It jolted me out of a deep sleep, loud and rhythmic, coming from downstairs. At first I thought maybe something had fallen over, but then it came again, and again. Someone was pounding on my front door. I grabbed my phone from the nightstand and checked the time. 3:17. Who the hell would be at my door at 3:17 in the morning? My heart was already racing as I swung my legs out of bed. The banging continued, steady and insistent. Not frantic like an emergency, but aggressive, demanding, like whoever was out there wasn't going away until I answered. I crept to the bedroom door and opened it slowly. The hallway was dark, but I could see the top of the stairs clearly enough. The pounding echoed through the house, coming from directly below. Definitely the front door. My phone's flashlight would have helped, but I didn't want to announce that I was awake, not until I knew what I was dealing with. I made my way to the top of the stairs, staying close to the wall where the floorboards were less likely to creak. The banging was getting more aggressive. Harder. The door was solid wood, but each impact seemed to shake the frame. I counted the beats as I listened. 4 heavy knocks, pause, 4 more knocks, pause, over and over. I started down the stairs, 1 step at a time. My bare feet found the spots I'd learned to avoid during my walkthrough, the places where the old boards groaned under weight. The banging covered most sounds anyway, but I didn't want to take chances. Halfway down, I stopped and listened. Still the same pattern. 4 knocks, pause, 4 knocks. But they were louder now, more violent, like whoever was out there was using something heavier than their fists. The living room was darker than upstairs. No streetlights out here, and the moon must have been behind clouds. I made my way across the room, avoiding the coffee table and the couch Christine had left behind. The front door was just ahead. The pounding stopped. I froze in the middle of the room, listening. Nothing. Complete silence, except for my own breathing, and the sound of my heart hammering in my chest. Had they heard me coming downstairs? I waited 30 seconds. Maybe 40. Still nothing. Maybe whoever it was had given up and left. But I needed to know for sure. I crept closer to the door and found the window beside it. The glass was old and wavy, but I could see through it well enough. I pressed my face close and peered out into the darkness. Nothing. The porch was empty, at least as far as I could tell. The problem was I couldn't see much of anything. It was too dark out there, like looking into a black hole. That's when I remembered the first rule. Keep the porch light on from sunset to sunrise. My stomach dropped. I'd completely forgotten about it. After dismissing the whole list as nonsense, I hadn't given the porch light a second thought when I went to bed. And now someone had been pounding on my door in the middle of the night, and I couldn't see who it was or if they were still out there. I felt around on the wall next to the door until I found the light switch. My hand was shaking as I flipped it up. The porch light came on, casting a yellow glow across the wooden boards and the steps leading down to the driveway. I pressed my face back to the window and looked again. Nobody there. The porch was completely empty, but the light let me see further into the yard, and there was no one walking away either. No car in the driveway, no figure disappearing into the trees. The banging had stopped the instant I turned on the light. I stayed by the window for another 10 minutes, watching and waiting. My phone said 3:28 when I finally stepped away from the door. Whoever had been out there was gone now, or at least they weren't making any more noise. I thought about opening the door and looking around outside, but something stopped me. Maybe it was the memory of the fourth rule. Do not go outside if voices call your name after dark. This hadn't been voices, but the principle seemed the same. Stay inside when weird things happen at night. I went back upstairs and sat on the edge of my bed, phone in hand, ready to call 911 if the banging started again. But it didn't. The house stayed quiet for the rest of the night. I'm not sure I slept much after that, but nothing else happened. When morning came, I made coffee and tried to convince myself the whole thing had been some kind of prank. Teenagers, maybe, or someone who'd had too much to drink and gotten the wrong address. It happened in small towns. People got confused, especially at night. But I wanted to check the door anyway, just to be sure. I opened the front door and stepped out onto the porch, coffee mug in hand. The morning air was cool and clean, with that fresh smell you only get in the country. Birds were singing in the trees behind the house. Everything looked normal and peaceful. Then I saw the scratches. They were in the wooden door frame, right at eye level. Deep gouges in the white-painted wood, like something with claws had been trying to get inside. 5 parallel lines on each side of the frame, carved deep enough to show the raw wood underneath. I ran my fingers over them. They were fresh. The wood was still slightly damp with sap where the scratches had cut through the paint and into the grain below. These hadn't been here yesterday. I would have noticed them during my walk-through. The scratches were too high up to be from a dog or cat, too wide apart, and too deep. Whatever had made them was big and had serious claws. I set my coffee mug on the porch railing and went back inside. The junk drawer next to the stove stuck just like it had the day before, but I yanked it open and pulled out the folded paper I'd found. House rules, written in Christine's careful cursive. I unfolded it and read the first rule again. Keep the porch light on from sunset to sunrise. Yesterday, I'd thought it was just practical advice about security and visibility. Now I wasn't so sure. The scratches in the door frame were real. The banging had been real. And both had stopped the moment I turned on that light. I read through the rest of the rules more carefully this time, paying attention to each word. Do not open windows after midnight. Do not answer phone calls between 2 and 3 a.m. Do not go outside or look out windows if voices call your name after dark. Leave the house immediately if you hear crying from the basement. Yesterday, these had seemed like the confused ramblings of an old woman who couldn't tell reality from fiction. This morning they felt different, more like warnings. I'd been keeping the porch light on every night since that first incident. 3 nights had passed without any problems. The scratches on the doorframe were still there, but nothing new had happened. I was starting to think maybe I'd gotten lucky, learned my lesson early. I had the house rules memorized by now. All 5 of them. I'd read that paper so many times the creases were wearing thin. Keep the porch light on from sunset to sunrise. Don't open windows after midnight. Don't answer phone calls between 2 and 3 a.m. Don't go outside or look out windows if voices call your name after dark. Leave the house immediately if you hear crying from the basement. Simple enough rules to follow. The porch light was easy. I just flipped the switch every evening around 6 and left it on until morning. The phone thing made sense too. Nothing good ever came from calls in the middle of the night anyway. The other rules seemed more specific, more targeted, like Christine had learned them the hard way. I was in bed reading when it started, some paperback thriller I'd picked up at the grocery store. Nothing fancy, just something to help me wind down before sleep. The bedside lamp cast a warm circle of light over the pages. The house was quiet except for the usual settling sounds I was getting used to. That's when I heard it. Soft tapping from somewhere behind me. Tap, tap, tap. I looked up from my book and listened. The sound was coming from the window on the far side of the bedroom, the one that faced the backyard and the woods beyond. I'd pulled the curtains closed earlier, but they were thin cotton things that Christine had left behind. They didn't block much light during the day, and they sure didn't muffle sound at night. Tap, tap, tap. There it was again. Same rhythm, same gentle pressure. Like someone knocking on glass with their knuckles, but softer, more patient. I set my book down on the nightstand and turned toward the sound. The curtains hung still in the windless night. Whatever was making the noise was right outside that window. My first instinct was to get up and look, see what was out there. Could be a tree branch blown by wind, though there wasn't any wind that I could tell. Could be an animal. Raccoon maybe, or a possum. They got into all kinds of mischief around houses. I was already pushing back the covers when I stopped. The rules, Christine's rules. I grabbed my phone from the nightstand and checked the time. The bright screen showed 12:47 a.m. Don't look out windows if voices call your name after dark. That was rule 4. But this wasn't voices calling my name. This was just tapping, knocking. The rule didn't say anything about not looking at windows because of random sounds. But rule 2 did. Don't open windows after midnight. I thought about that for a second. The rule said, don't open windows, not don't look out them. But maybe there was a reason for that. Maybe looking was part of the problem. Tap, tap, tap. The sound came again, a little louder this time, more insistent, like whatever was out there knew I was awake and wanted my attention. I felt that pull again, that natural curiosity that makes you want to peek behind curtains and investigate strange noises. Every instinct I had said to get up, walk over to that window and see what was making the sound. Instead, I forced myself to turn away. I rolled over in bed so I was facing the opposite wall, the one with the door that led to the hallway. Put my back to the window and the tapping sound. Pulled the covers up around my shoulders and tried to focus on something else. The tapping continued. Tap, tap, tap. Pause. Tap, tap, tap. Pause. It had a rhythm to it, almost musical, patient but persistent, like whoever was out there had all the time in the world and wasn't planning to give up anytime soon. I closed my eyes and tried to ignore it, tried to think about my book, about the thriller plot with its predictable twists and cardboard characters, tried to think about work, about the article I needed to finish tomorrow for a client who paid decent money for boring content about insurance regulations. Tap, tap, tap. The sound was getting louder, not by much, but enough that I could tell the difference. Whatever was out there was either hitting harder or moving closer to the glass. I kept my eyes closed and my face turned toward the wall. The smart thing to do was follow Christine's rules. She'd lived in this house for who knows how many years. She'd learned something, figured something out, and written it down for the next person. For me. The least I could do was listen to her advice. Tap, 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 tap. Now it was coming faster, the pauses between sets getting shorter. Still not aggressive like the pounding on the front door had been, but more urgent, more demanding. I pulled the second pillow over my head and pressed it against my ear. The sound was muffled, but still audible. Still there, still persistent. Still following that same patient rhythm. This went on for what felt like hours. Sometimes the tapping would get softer, so quiet I could barely hear it through the pillow and the walls. Other times it would get more insistent, the rhythm faster and the impacts harder against the glass. But it never stopped, completely. Never gave up. I must have dozed off at some point because I woke up to sunlight filtering through the curtains and birds chirping outside. My phone showed 7:23 a.m. The pillow was still pressed against my head, and my neck was stiff from sleeping in a weird position. The tapping had stopped. I sat up in bed and listened for a moment. Nothing but normal morning sounds. Cars passing on the road out front, birds in the trees, the distant hum of someone's lawnmower a few houses over. I got up and walked to the kitchen, made coffee, and tried to convince myself that maybe I'd imagined the whole thing. Maybe I'd been more tired than I thought. Maybe the sound had been something perfectly normal that my half-asleep brain had turned into something sinister. But I knew better. The tapping had been real, patient and persistent, and definitely coming from right outside that window. After I'd finished my first cup of coffee, I walked back upstairs to the bedroom. I needed to see what was out there in the daylight, needed to know what I'd been dealing with. I pulled back the thin curtains and looked out the window. The backyard stretched out below me, brown grass leading to the tree line about 50 feet away. The morning sun cast long shadows from the woods across the yard. Everything looked normal and peaceful. Then I looked down at the ground directly below the window. The dirt there was soft from recent rain, and I could see marks in it clearly. Footprints, human-shaped but wrong somehow. Too big, for one thing. The prints looked like they came from bare feet, but feet that were maybe size 14 or 15. Way bigger than mine. I pressed my face closer to the glass and followed the prints with my eyes. They came out of the woods in a straight line, heading directly for the house. They stopped right beneath my window, where the ground was more disturbed, like someone had been standing there for a long time. Shifting their weight, maybe. Moving around but not leaving. The prints led back toward the woods the same way they'd come. A straight line from the trees to my window and back again. I stared at those prints for a long time, trying to make sense of them. Trying to come up with some explanation that didn't involve the obvious conclusion. But the obvious conclusion was the only one that fit. Something had been standing outside my bedroom window all night. Something with big feet and enough patience to keep tapping on the glass for hours, trying to get my attention while I slept just a few feet away on the other side of the wall. I was glad I'd followed Christine's rules. Real glad I hadn't gotten up to look. A week went by without any more incidents. I kept the porch light on every night and stayed away from the bedroom window after midnight. The house settled into a routine that felt almost normal. I'd gotten comfortable with the quiet evenings, made dinner, worked on freelance articles, watched some TV on the small set Christine had left behind. The rules were becoming second nature. Turn on the porch light at sunset. Don't mess with windows after midnight. Simple enough. Tuesday night I was in bed reading around 11:30 when I heard the landline ring downstairs. I'd kept Christine's old rotary phone on the kitchen counter. The thing was probably 40 years old, heavy black plastic with a real bell inside that you could hear from anywhere in the house. I liked the character it added to the place. Made the kitchen feel authentic, like it belonged to the 1970s. The ringing stopped after 4 or 5 rings. Probably a wrong number or some telemarketer who didn't care about the time. I went back to my book and forgot about it. An hour later, I was starting to drift off when the phone rang again. This time, it kept going. Ring after ring. That sharp metallic sound cutting through the quiet house. I checked my bedside clock. 12:47. Late for anyone to be calling, but not impossible. Could be an emergency. Could be someone who really needed to reach the previous owner and didn't know she'd moved. I got up and padded downstairs in my boxers and t-shirt. The kitchen was dark except for the glow from the porch light coming through the window. The phone sat on the counter next to the coffee maker, ringing away like it had something important to say. I reached for the receiver and stopped. The third rule. Don't answer phone calls between 2 and 3 a.m. I looked at the clock on the microwave. 12:51, still before the danger window, but close enough to make me think twice. The phone kept ringing, each tone sharp and insistent. Better safe than sorry. I let it ring and went back upstairs. The ringing followed me up the steps and into the bedroom. It didn't stop, just kept going. Ring after ring, like whoever was calling had infinite patience and no intention of giving up. I tried to read, but couldn't concentrate. The sound was getting under my skin, making my teeth ache. There was something wrong with the rhythm of it. Too regular, too mechanical. Real phones didn't ring with that kind of precision. I checked the time again. 1:15. The ringing continued. I'd never heard a phone ring for so long without stopping. Most people gave up after 10 or 15 rings. This had been going for over 20 minutes straight. 1:30, 1:45, 2 o'clock. Now I was definitely in the danger zone. The third rule was clear about not answering calls between 2 and 3 a.m. Whatever was calling, I wasn't supposed to pick up. The ringing got louder. That didn't make sense, but I swear it was true. Each ring seemed to cut through the house with more force, like the phone was getting angry about being ignored. I pulled a pillow over my head, but the sound came right through. It wasn't just noise anymore. It felt like something physical, like the ringing was reaching into my skull and rattling around inside. 2:15, 2:30. The ringing took on a different quality, more urgent, more demanding. The pauses between rings got shorter, creating an almost frantic rhythm that made my heart race. I wanted to go downstairs and rip the phone cord out of the wall, but that would mean leaving the bedroom during the forbidden hours. I stayed put and tried to count the rings. Lost track after 300. 2:45. The ringing suddenly stopped. The silence was so complete it made my ears ring. I lay there waiting for it to start again, but nothing happened. The house was quiet except for the usual settling noises and the hum of the refrigerator downstairs. 3 o'clock came and went. The phone stayed silent. I managed to fall asleep around 4 and woke up feeling like I'd been hit by a truck. My head pounded and my nerves were shot. The memory of that endless ringing made my skin crawl. I stumbled downstairs to make coffee and stopped dead when I saw the kitchen. The phone was still there on the counter, looking innocent enough in the morning light. But something was wrong with the picture. I stared at it for a long moment before my brain caught up with what my eyes were seeing. The cord was unplugged. The thick black phone cord lay coiled on the floor next to the counter, its plug sitting about 2 feet away from the wall jack, like someone had pulled it out and dropped it. I stood there holding my empty coffee mug, trying to make sense of what I was looking at. I remembered unplugging the phone yesterday afternoon. I'd been cleaning the counter and needed to move some things around. Unplugged the phone, wiped down the surface, then got distracted by a work email and forgot to plug it back in. The phone had been disconnected all day, disconnected all evening, disconnected when I heard it ringing at 12:47. Disconnected when it rang for 2.5 hours straight, getting louder and more insistent with each passing minute. I picked up the receiver with shaking hands and listened. No dial tone, nothing. Just dead plastic against my ear. The phone had been ringing all night without being connected to anything. No power source, no phone line, no way for any signal to reach it. But I'd heard every ring clear as day, loud enough to keep me awake, urgent enough to make my heart pound. I plugged the cord back into the wall jack and heard the dial tone hum to life. That's when I knew Christine's rules weren't suggestions. They were survival instructions written by someone who'd learned the hard way what happened when you didn't follow them. I went back upstairs and got the folded paper from my nightstand drawer where I'd started keeping it. Read through all 5 rules again, memorizing every word. From that night on, I followed them religiously. Porch light on from sunset to sunrise every single night. Windows stayed closed and covered after midnight. Phone calls between 2 and 3 a.m. got ignored, no matter how long they rang. The rules weren't crazy old woman nonsense. They were the only thing standing between me and whatever was trying to get my attention in this house. 2 weeks went by without a single problem. I kept that porch light burning every night, didn't mess with the windows after midnight, and let the phone ring whenever it wanted to during those late hours. The house stayed quiet. I started to think maybe I'd gotten lucky. Maybe whatever had been testing me those first few nights had moved on to bother someone else. The scratches on the doorframe were still there, and I could still see those big footprints in the dirt when it rained and dried again, but nothing new happened. Part of me wondered if I was making connections that weren't really there. 2 weeks of normal life can make you question a lot of things. I'd wake up in the morning, make coffee, work on my articles, eat dinner, watch Christine's old TV, and go to bed. Regular stuff. The kind of routine that makes weird memories feel like bad dreams. But I kept following the rules anyway. Every single one of them, exactly like Christine had written them down. Better safe than sorry. I'd been thinking about doing something with the backyard. The grass was mostly dead, and there were some decent spots near the house that got good sun. Ellie always said I should try gardening. Never had the space for it in our old place, but here I had 3 acres. Most of it was woods, but the area right behind the house was clear. So I drove to the hardware store in town and picked up some basic supplies. A small shovel, a hand rake, packets of seeds that would grow fast in the spring soil. Nothing fancy. I figured I'd start small and see how it went. The weather was nice that afternoon, warm for early spring, with the sun bright enough that I didn't need a jacket. I picked a spot about 20 feet from the back door where the ground looked soft and started digging. The work felt good, physical stuff that didn't require much thinking. Just turn over the dirt, pull out the weeds, break up the clumps with the rake. I hadn't done anything like this in years. Desk work keeps you inside too much. I'd been at it for maybe an hour when I heard my name. Ashton. The voice came from somewhere behind me, back toward the woods. I stopped digging and looked up, but I didn't turn around. Something about the way it sounded made me pause. Ashton, come here. It was a woman's voice. High and clear, calling from maybe 50 yards away where the trees started. My first thought was that it sounded like Ellie. Same basic tone, same way of saying my name, but there was something else mixed in with it. Something that didn't fit. I need to show you something. The voice had a sing-song quality to it, like someone talking to a small child or trying to get a dog to come when called. Ellie never talked like that. Not once in 15 years of marriage. She was direct about everything. If she wanted to tell me something, she just said it. I stayed crouched in my garden patch and didn't answer. Ashton, come here, I found something. The playful tone was getting stronger, almost musical now, like the voice was enjoying itself. It definitely wasn't Ellie. Couldn't be. Ellie lived 2 states away and had no reason to drive out here. And even if she had, she wouldn't be standing in the woods calling my name like we were playing some kind of game. I remembered Christine's 4th rule. Do not go outside or look out windows if voices call your name after dark. It wasn't dark yet, but the sun was getting lower, maybe an hour or 2 before sunset. And technically, I was already outside. But the spirit of the rule seemed pretty clear. Don't respond to voices that call your name when you can't see who's talking. Ashton, why won't you answer me? The voice sounded hurt now, disappointed, like I was being rude by ignoring it. But that sing-song quality was still there underneath, that childlike, playful tone that made my skin feel tight. I went back to digging, focused on the dirt and the seeds, and tried to act like I hadn't heard anything. Ashton, Ashton, come and see. The calls were coming faster now, more excited, like whoever was back there thought they could get my attention if they just kept trying. The voice bounced around in the trees, echoing slightly, making it hard to pinpoint exactly where it was coming from. I opened one of the seed packets and started dropping them into the shallow rows I'd dug. Tomatoes. The packet said they'd be ready to harvest in about 10 weeks if I kept them watered and got enough sun. Don't ignore me, Ashton. I have something special for you. The hurt tone was back, but with an edge to it now. Less playful, more demanding, like a child who wasn't getting their way and was starting to get angry about it. I kept planting seeds, one every few inches, just like the packet instructions said. Cover them with loose dirt, pat it down gently, move to the next spot. Simple, repetitive work that gave me something to focus on besides the voice. Ashton, Ashton, Ashton. Now it was just calling my name over and over, rapid fire. The musical quality was getting more pronounced, like a song with words I couldn't quite make out. It echoed through the trees and bounced around the yard, coming from different directions as whatever was making the sound moved through the woods. I finished the tomatoes and opened the packet of lettuce seeds. These were smaller, harder to handle. I had to be more careful about spacing them out. "Why won't you come play with me, Ashton?" The voice had shifted again. Younger now, like a little girl asking why I wouldn't join her game, but still with that underlying sing-song tone that made my hands shake slightly as I dropped the tiny seeds into the dirt. The sun was definitely getting lower, maybe 45 minutes before I'd need to go inside and turn on the porch light. I wanted to finish this row before then. "I'm getting lonely out here, Ashton. Come keep me company." Now the voice sounded sad, pleading, like someone who really was lonely and just wanted to talk. For a second, I almost felt bad about ignoring it. Almost turned around to see who was back there. But that sing-song quality was still there. That playful, musical tone that didn't match the sad words, like someone acting out loneliness instead of actually feeling it. I covered the lettuce seeds and moved on to the carrots. "Fine, be that way." The voice was angry now, sharp and frustrated. The musical quality turned harsh, like a song played too fast and too loud. It echoed through the trees with a bitter edge that made me glad I hadn't turned around. "You're no fun, Ashton. No fun at all." The calls were coming from different spots now. First from directly behind me, then from the left, then from the right. Like whatever was making the sound was moving around the edge of the woods, trying to find an angle that would make me look. I kept my eyes on the garden. Carrot seeds in neat rows, covered with dirt, patted down. The sun was orange now, hanging lower in the sky. Maybe 30 minutes before I'd need to head inside. "I'll wait for you, Ashton. I'll wait all night if I have to." The voice was back to being playful, patient, like someone settling in for a long game. The sing-song tone was stronger than ever, almost hypnotic. It made me want to turn around just to make it stop. Instead, I started on the last packet. Green beans, bigger seeds that were easier to handle. "Ashton, Ashton, Ashton. Come and play. Come and play." Now it really was singing. The words had a rhythm to them, like a children's rhyme. It went on, the same few words repeated over and over, with that musical lilt that seemed to get inside my head. The sun touched the horizon. Time to go in. I gathered up the empty seed packets and the tools, keeping my back to the woods. The singing continued, following me as I walked toward the house. "Don't go inside, Ashton. Stay and play with me." The voice sounded closer now, like whatever was making it had moved to the very edge of the trees. I could hear branches rustling like something large was moving through the undergrowth. I reached the back door and fumbled with the handle, my hands shaking slightly. "You can't hide in there forever, Ashton. I'll be waiting when you come out." The door opened and I stepped inside, closing it firmly behind me. I turned the deadbolt and pulled the curtains closed over the kitchen window that faced the backyard. The singing continued outside, faint now, but still there. That same musical chant of my name, over and over, with a patience that made my skin crawl. I went to the front of the house and turned on the porch light. The singing was still going when I came back to the kitchen. Softer now, but persistent. Like whoever was out there really was planning to wait all night. I made dinner and tried to ignore it. The voice would fade for a few minutes, then start up again. Sometimes angry, sometimes pleading, sometimes just that hypnotic sing-song chant, but always with that musical quality that sounded like Ellie but wasn't Ellie. Could never be Ellie. Around 8 o'clock, the singing stopped. I waited by the kitchen window, listening. Nothing but normal evening sounds. Wind in the trees, a few birds settling in for the night. Whatever had been calling my name was gone. I realized I'd been holding my breath. For over 2 hours, something had been trying to get me to come into the woods, calling my name, pleading with me, getting angry when I didn't respond. And the whole time I'd kept working in my garden, following Christine's 4th rule without even thinking about it. Don't go outside or look out windows if voices call your name after dark. The rule had saved me from whatever was waiting in those trees. I'd been in the house 3 weeks when I heard the crying. I was sitting at Christine's kitchen table with my laptop open, working on an article about sustainable farming practices for a trade magazine. The deadline was tomorrow and I'd been putting it off, so I had my coffee mug full and my head down, typing away about crop rotation and soil health. The crying started soft. Real soft. At first I thought maybe it was the old pipes making noise, or the furnace kicking on downstairs. The house made all kinds of sounds I was still getting used to. Creaking floors, settling walls, that sort of thing. But this wasn't pipes or furnace noise. This was someone sobbing. My hands went still on the keyboard. I sat there listening, trying to figure out where the sound was coming from. It was definitely human crying, the kind of deep, broken sobbing that comes from real pain. Someone was in serious distress and the sound was drifting up from somewhere below me, from the basement. I pushed my chair back from the table and stood up. The crying continued, muffled but clear enough that I could tell it was a woman. She sounded like she was hurt, or scared, or both. Every instinct I had told me to go downstairs and help whoever was down there. I took a step toward the basement door, which was just off the kitchen near the back hallway. The crying got a little louder, like whoever was making the sound knew I was moving around upstairs, like she knew I was listening. That's when I stopped walking. The 5th rule. Christine's 5th rule came back to me all at once, clear as day. Leave the house immediately if you hear crying from the basement. I stood there in the middle of the kitchen, my article half finished on the laptop screen, listening to someone sob their heart out in my basement. Part of me wanted to ignore the rule. What kind of person hears someone crying and just leaves? What if it was a real person who needed help? What if someone had broken in and gotten hurt? But I'd learned not to ignore Christine's rules. The scratches on my doorframe were still there. The footprints under my bedroom window kept coming back after every rain. The phone that rang for hours while unplugged sat right there on the counter next to me. Christine's rules weren't suggestions. They were survival instructions. The crying continued, steady and heartbroken. It tugged at something deep in my chest, made me want to run downstairs and find whoever was making that awful sound. But I forced myself to move in the other direction. I walked back to the table and closed my laptop with shaking hands. The sobbing got louder when I did that, more urgent, like whoever was down there could tell I was getting ready to leave and didn't want me to go. I grabbed my car keys from the counter where I always left them. The crying was definitely getting louder now, rising up through the floorboards like it was following me around the kitchen. I could hear the pain in it, the desperation. It sounded so real, so human. My hands were shaking when I shoved the keys in my pocket. I walked to the front door and the crying followed me. It seemed to move through the house below me, tracking my steps from room to room. By the time I reached the door, the sobbing was loud enough that I could hear it clearly through the floor. I turned the deadbolt and stepped outside onto the porch. The crying got even louder, like whoever was making it knew I was leaving and was begging me not to go. The sound came right up through the floorboards and out into the yard. I locked the door behind me and walked to my truck. The crying was so loud now I could hear it through the walls of the house. Desperate, broken sobbing that made my chest tight and my eyes water. I got in the truck and started the engine. Even with the truck running, I could still hear the crying coming from inside my house. It followed me all the way to the end of the driveway. I drove to Millbrook, the little town about 15 minutes away where I did my grocery shopping. There was a motel there called the Pine Rest, nothing fancy but clean enough. I got a room for the night and sat on the scratchy bedspread, staring at the wood-paneled walls and wondering what the hell I might have found if I'd gone down to my basement. The woman at the front desk had looked at me funny when I checked in without any luggage, just my wallet and keys. I told her I'd locked myself out of my house and needed somewhere to stay until the locksmith could come in the morning. She seemed to buy it. I didn't sleep much. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard that crying. Real human sobbing, full of pain and fear. It had sounded so genuine, so much like someone who really needed help. Part of me kept thinking I should drive back and check, rules or no rules. But I'd learned to trust Christine's warnings. Whatever had been crying in my basement, it wasn't something I wanted to meet. I checked out early and drove back to the house around 8 in the morning. The place looked normal from the outside. Quiet. Peaceful. Like nothing had happened. I unlocked the front door and stepped inside. The house was completely silent. No crying, no sobbing, no sounds at all except the normal creaks and settling noises I'd gotten used to. I walked through the kitchen to the basement door and opened it. The wooden steps led down into darkness, same as always. I flipped on the light switch and went downstairs to check. The basement was exactly like it had always been. Old concrete floor, stone foundation walls, furnace in one corner, water heater next to it. A few metal shelves with some boxes and old paint cans that Christine had left behind. Cobwebs in the corners, dust on everything. No sign that anyone had been down there. No footprints in the dust, no disturbed boxes. Nothing moved or changed. Just an empty basement that smelled like old concrete and heating oil. I walked around the whole space, checking every corner, looking behind the furnace and water heater. Nothing. If someone had been down there crying their eyes out, they'd left no trace of it. The basement was as empty and quiet as it had ever been. I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop closed, looking at Christine's house rules taped to the refrigerator. The white paper had gotten worn from handling, but the careful cursive writing was still clear. 5 simple rules that had kept me alive for 3 weeks. The crying from last night was gone. Whatever had been down in that basement had vanished without a trace, just like the scratches on the door frame said it would. Just like the footprints outside my bedroom window had warned me it would. Just like the phone ringing when it wasn't even plugged in had told me it would. I'd been wrong about Christine Burke. She wasn't some confused old woman whose family had to put her in a nursing home because she couldn't tell reality from make-believe anymore. She wasn't suffering from dementia or mixing up her mystery novels with real life. Christine had been something else entirely. She'd been a survivor. I got up and walked to the refrigerator, reading the rules again. Keep the porch light on from sunset to sunrise. Don't open windows after midnight. Don't answer phone calls between 2 and 3 a.m. Don't go outside or look out windows if voices call your name after dark. Leave the house immediately if you hear crying from the basement. Christine had lived in this house for 40 years. 40 years of whatever was out there in the woods, whatever scratched at doors when the porch light went off, whatever stood outside bedroom windows tapping on glass with feet too big to be human. 40 years of phones ringing when they weren't connected, and voices calling from the trees that sounded like people you'd lost. She'd figured out how to survive it all. I ran my finger along the edge of the paper. The rules weren't random. They weren't the product of a failing mind making connections that didn't exist. They were hard-won knowledge, learned through experience I couldn't imagine. Maybe she'd made mistakes early on. Maybe she'd answered the phone during those forbidden hours or gone outside when something called her name. Maybe she'd seen things that taught her exactly what not to do, and then she'd written it all down. I thought about the nursing home. Christine's family probably thought they were doing the right thing, moving her somewhere safe where people could take care of her. They probably thought the house rules were proof she couldn't live alone anymore, evidence that she was losing touch with reality. They had no idea she was the sanest person any of them would ever meet. I walked back to the table and opened my laptop. The sustainable farming article was still there, half finished. I had work to do, deadlines to meet, a life to build in this place. But first I needed to understand something. Christine hadn't just survived here. She'd found a way to make it work. The house stayed quiet during the day. Whatever lived in the woods, whatever came knocking at night, whatever made phones ring and voices call from the trees, it all followed rules too. It had boundaries, limits. As long as I respected those limits, it would respect mine. I'd found the proof last night. I'd heard crying from the basement, followed Christine's rule, and left immediately. When I came back this morning, there was no trace of anything down there. No footprints, no disturbed boxes, nothing moved or changed. The basement was empty because I'd done what I was supposed to do. The agreement held. I spent the morning finishing the farming article, then started on a piece about home security systems for a regional magazine. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was writing about protecting homes from break-ins while living in a house where the real protection came from a list of rules written in careful cursive script. Around noon, I made lunch and sat at the kitchen table eating a sandwich, looking out at the backyard where I'd started the garden. The tomato seeds were probably sprouting by now, pushing up through the soil I'd turned, while something with Ellie's voice called to me from the woods. I'd kept working that day, kept my back to the trees, kept planting seeds while ignoring the voice that begged and threatened and promised to wait all night. I'd followed Rule 4, and nothing had happened to me. That was the key. Christine had figured out that following the rules meant safety. Breaking them meant consequences I didn't want to think about. I finished my sandwich and got back to work. The house stayed quiet, no scratching, no tapping, no crying. Whatever shared this property with me was sleeping or waiting or doing whatever supernatural things did during daylight hours. As long as I kept my end of the bargain, it would keep its end too. The afternoon passed peacefully. I wrote 2 more articles and answered emails from clients. Around 5 o'clock, I started dinner, cooking on Christine's old stove while the sun got lower outside the kitchen window. 6:15, time for the porch light. I walked to the front door and flipped the switch. Yellow light spilled across the wooden porch, pushing back the shadows that were starting to gather in the corners. The first rule, the most important one: keep that light burning from sunset to sunrise no matter what. I'd learned that lesson the hard way on my first night here. Back in the kitchen, I finished making dinner and sat down to eat while the sun disappeared behind the trees. The house felt peaceful, safe. As long as I followed Christine's rules, it would stay that way. I thought about calling someone, my editor maybe, or one of the few friends who'd stayed in touch after the divorce. But what would I tell them? That I was living in a haunted house and everything was fine as long as I followed a list of instructions left by the previous owner? They'd think I was losing my mind, just like Christine's family had thought about her. So I kept it to myself. This was between me and whatever lived in the woods behind the house. A private arrangement that worked as long as both sides respected it. After dinner, I settled into Christine's living room with a book. The small TV was there if I wanted it, but I'd gotten used to the quiet evenings, reading by lamplight while the porch light burned outside and the house creaked softly around me. Around 10 o'clock, I heard something moving in the woods, branches rustling, leaves crunching under footsteps that might or might not be human. I kept reading. As long as I stayed inside with the doors locked and didn't respond to anything that might call my name, I was safe. The sounds faded after a while. 11:30. Time for bed. I turned off the living room lamps and headed upstairs, leaving the porch light burning. In the bedroom, I closed the curtains tight and made sure the window was locked. Rule 2. No windows open after midnight, and no looking outside if something came tapping. I got ready for bed and settled under the covers with my book. The house was quiet except for the normal, settling sounds old houses made. No phones ringing, no voices calling, no crying from the basement. Just peace. I'd been here 6 months now. 6 months of following Christine's rules without exception, and the house had become exactly what I'd hoped for when I bought it. A quiet place to work, to heal from the divorce, to build something new. The supernatural elements were just part of the arrangement, like paying property taxes or maintaining the roof. Some nights there were sounds outside. Some nights the phone rang during the forbidden hours, or voices called from the woods. But I'd learned to ignore all of it. I'd learned to trust Christine's wisdom and follow her rules exactly. The house protected me as long as I protected it. I thought about the previous owners before Christine. Had they known about the rules? Had they figured out how to coexist with whatever lived here? Or had they left for other reasons? Maybe Christine was the first one to understand the pattern, to recognize that the supernatural activity followed its own logic. Maybe that's why she'd stayed 40 years while others hadn't. I closed the book and turned off the bedside lamp. Outside, something howled in the distance, long and mournful. Not quite a wolf, not quite human. I pulled the covers up and closed my eyes. Whatever was out there could howl all it wanted. I was safe inside, protected by rules I'd memorized and boundaries I respected. The crying last night had been a test. The voices in the woods, the tapping at windows, the scratching at doors, all tests to see if I'd break the rules Christine had left behind. So far, I'd passed everyone. I'd learned to live with mystery. Some things didn't need explanations, just acceptance. Some rules were worth following even when you didn't understand the reasons behind them. Some agreements worked better when you didn't examine them too closely. Christine had understood that. She'd found a way to make peace with forces beyond her comprehension, and she'd left me the roadmap to do the same. I fell asleep to the sound of wind in the trees and the distant howling that might have been an animal or might have been something else entirely. It didn't matter anymore. I was home and I was safe, and I knew exactly what I needed to do to stay that way. The rules were simple. Follow them, and live peacefully in a house most people would consider uninhabitable. I'd found my sanctuary in the most unlikely place, protected by an old woman's wisdom and my own willingness to accept what I couldn't understand.